Hey there, and thank you so much for watching this video. Today I am going to share 5 principles that I follow each time I am mixing a piece of music, typically cues for media production. So this is production music or even film scoring. And these 5 tips are based heavily on the use of isotopes packages, which are essentially ozone and neutron, and I'm going to talk about how I use those. You could accomplish these things in other DAWs. The reason that I use Neutron inside Cubase instead of the stock plugins has to do with convenience. They really are. This is a convenient workflow, but this isn't all. It's all based on things like limiters and EQ and stuff that is available. So understanding these principles will still help you even if you're not using Neutron. Now let's talk a little bit about what are the main challenges here. The main challenge is you're trying to produce a piece of music to usually a specific broadcast quality level. And for me, oftentimes that is a LUFS measurement, right? A loudness units full scale measurement, a LUFS. In this case, the demo I'm doing here, the target is minus 16 LUFS. That's one value that I'm targeting. The second value I'm targeting is true peak. True peak is a complicated thing to understand mathematically, but essentially you always want to have minus 1 dB true peak, and that is going to help defend against the kinds of problems that happen in the streaming world when compressed and uncompressed audio are interchangeable, so that you don't get distortion or strange artifacts. Okay, so I'm looking for LUFS and true peak, and then the final thing I'm looking for is to match the tonal balance of some reference tracks. So I'm writing music to reference tracks traditionally, and I'm trying to match what's going on in the bass region, the low mids, the upper mids, and the highs, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to show you how that's really where the Neutron package gets convenient. I'm in no way trying to pitch using this software. I'm just demonstrating how I go about a workflow for reliably mixing. I will say that an important aspect of this for me is that it's very fast. So there's a lot of automated tools that I'm using. You'll see how those work. So I'm going to dive into my demonstration here and go over things little bit by little bit. So the first thing that I want to get at here is the structure of my busing. So I have in Cubase, I have 3 configurations that I mainly use. The first one is instruments, and instruments is going to show everything. Let me actually switch over here to my mixer. So all of these instruments, and I talked a little bit about this in a previous video, these are all actually instruments, outputs coming from Vienna Ensemble Pro, and I don't do any processing on any of these channels. These go all into a stems bus. So these are stems. This is where I do all my processing, all of it, except for some rather insignificant limiting on and maximizing on the main master. And then the final tier is deliverables. These are what I export to my clients. Now I want to point out a very important part of this workflow that I think is essential to any media composer, and that is the design of this structure is such that I can spit out any combination of stems and they'll be very close. Of course, they can't be exactly the same as the master, but what I don't want and what I need to avoid from a professional standpoint is a case where my master bus has all the processing on it, and if I hit it with if I hit the compression and maximizers on my master bus with an entirely different combination of stems, that I'm going to get a very different result. This is something I really try to avoid so that I can kick out alternate mixes, and they're really going to hold up within a few dB max. I like to aim for about 1 dB range, but I also want to be able to kick out, just a melody only mix or some kind of underscore mix of the stems. The idea being that thus, what is summed to my bus is going to hold up no matter what I send to my master bus. And that means almost all the processing and almost all of the dynamics And really the mastering is actually happening in my stems. So that's very important to understand here. I'm going to explain how I go about accomplishing that. Okay, so the first step is I look at my stems, which is where I do all my mixing. I don't run any effects. I will run effects on the instruments like here. I think I had, I don't have it up, but I do have some effects on here like delay or something, things that are part of the instrument, right? But I don't do any real mixing there. That all happens in the stems. Now, you can see that I did have an EQ, a high pass filter here on my, what is that? My synths high. Okay, but generally I'm not even really doing that much EQ here. I am running a relay on every one of my stems and a neutron EQ on every one of my stems, and you're going to see why. The first step that I do is I play this back, and actually I'm going to start by just disabling my inserts. Okay, and I also want to have the strip up there, and I'm going to disable my strips as well. Okay, so this is what I get coming in. I'm going to actually need, for the demonstrations here, I'm going to need to put the pre up there as well. Okay, so you'll see that I have gained up the pre-gain on these particular stems. So what's going on here? Well, basically, I play it back and I look at which stems am I using here. That's the first thing. What stems am I using? I can see that you know, I'm using this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. I'm using 5 stems. Then I'll just go ahead and I will say show only selected. So these are the 5 stems that I'm dealing with. From now on in my mix, I'm really working with this. And those are the 5 that I have pre-gain on. Why do I have pre-gain on them? Well, basically I'm pre-gaining those stems to some kind of sum target. And what is that sum target? So the sum target is what's the level that I want these to sum to ultimately when they land in my master. And I have a little calculator here that I use to do this. Very simple spreadsheet. I type in how many stems do I have here. You know, I've got 5 stems. That's why I typed in 5 here. And there's an equation here. The equation is -20 times log₁₀, whatever this count is. And what that does is it tells me basically a pre-gain sum target. This is telling me that each of those 5 tracks can kind of aim at -14, and if I do that, then I shouldn't go over on my master bus. But I actually want to sort of gain into that region first. So that's what I'm doing with the pre-gain here, is I bounce up the pre-gain on the stems I'm using, and I look over here. Let me take myself off. When it's playing back, I'm looking down here in this area here. I'm looking for that to be roughly -14, which is my pre-gain sum target. That's my starting point. From there, I start mixing. And the first thing I do, because again, I'm concerned about saving time, is I use Visual Mixer. And what Visual Mixer does is this is part of the Neutron package. And as long as there's a relay on every single track, which you'll see over here, I've got these relays on every track. I'm going to go ahead and enable those. I actually go ahead and I hit Mix Assistant here. In this case, the instrument that I really want to highlight, you have to select one. I select mallets because that's really the stem that I want to make sure people are hearing. And then I click Begin Listening and I play the track from beginning to end. And the Visual Mixer basically listens to all the tracks and it uses the relays to basically set levels. So it's like a rough mix. It just does it for me. And I find 9 times out of 10, it's a decent rough mix, at least to get me to the next step. The next step, the second step, is bass control. So when you are mixing, you need to make sure that your bass is under control, because if your bass is maybe not compressed enough, there's too much dynamic range in the bass, there's a lot of masking maybe where you have a synth bass that's masking a bass guitar or cellos or something, there's masking going on, it can really ruin all of the subsequent regions of your mix, the low mids, the upper mids, and the highs. So getting control of the bass. How do I do that? Well, let me bring this up. What I do is I use another aspect of the Neutron package called Tonal Balance Control. And I create a custom target here. I click on this and I say create target. In this case, I created a target from a folder that contained 3 different reference tracks, and it came up with this. And this is basically a representation. If I try to keep this white line that occurs when I play my track back kind of inside this blue region, then that is an indicator, a strong indicator and a guide for me to know that I'm meeting the lows and the highs and the mids relative to the reference track I'm aiming for. The reason that I start here and the reason this is connected to controlling my bass is that it gives me a nice way to solo. So I solo my bass. You probably can't really hear that very well, but you can solo any region that you want. And then I can hear what instruments are in there, and I go back to my stems. Again, I don't do any processing on the individual instruments. This is just on stems. And then on this over here, I can see, okay, I've got this synths low is doing a lot. I've also got this plucked has got some keys and mallets. So the nice thing, this is where it's very convenient to use tonal balance, but essentially this is just EQ, right? So you have an EQ in any DAW, and Cubase has a load of stock EQs. The nice thing about this is that I can load it up in the lower region of tonal balance and see how my EQ changes actually affect the way that that curve comes through. So this is an example of the EQ that is running on the mallets stem over here, right? And that's why on every channel I have a Neutron EQ. So you'll see if I open up the Neutron EQ, it is representative of this. And if I were to drag this node here, you can see that it's moving, right? So it allows me to basically remote control the EQ on that stem while I'm looking at my tonal balance, and that helps me take control of the bass, shape the bass. I'm going to also probably put some compression on the bass, which I would do here in my strip if I was going to do that sort of thing. So let's say now I've got my bass controlled. The next thing is I'm actually going to go through and listen to the low mids. So I play it, I solo, I figure out which ones of my stems I need to change. I come down here and I select the EQ. Then I do the same thing for high mids, and then I do the same thing for highs, and I try to create an approximation. You don't need to be exact. It's just about really trying to use this tonal balance range as a guide. Once I have that done, then I'm into limiting and setting target for true peak. And let me show you how I go about doing that. So this is a very important stage, because this is the stage where I start meeting my LUFS target and my true peak target. And again, just as a reminder, I'm trying to accomplish this in the stems. I'm trying to do very minimal processing on the master bus. The traditional way to do this kind of work is you put some kind of maximizer, or maybe you run a suite of plugins on your stereo bus, and you can get any LUFS you want. You can get any true peak you want. It's very easy. You can even do EQ processing and such to get that tonal balance on your master bus. The problem with that is that when I export my mix through a lot of master bus processing, the master bus processing is going to react differently. The compressors are going to be triggered differently because I'm sending all the instruments through, right? Now, if I go ahead and I take 4 or 5 instruments out because a production library wants an alt mix, now it's hitting all of those compressors differently. Now my alt mix and the original mix, they have some significant differences that make them a little more difficult for an editor to use, that's not really acceptable. So I want to shift as much of the processing as I can to my stems. Doing it with tonal balance control and the EQs get me 95% of the way there, but I do have to do some limiting. So let me show you what I do. I come back again to the limiters that are built into the channel strip, and I'm going to go ahead and just go ahead. I've got quick link enabled, and I'm going to turn all those on. So inside the channel strip, I have a limiter, and the limiter's output is set to 0 dB. And what I do is I basically highlight these together. I make sure that quick link is on. This is a Cubase feature. And then I hold down Option and Shift, and while I don't actually have to do that if I have the quick link on, sorry. And then I'm going to basically bring up this input. I'm looking for a target over here. So before I have these values over here in my meter, I've got integrated is around -28 and true peak is -5. So that's pretty far off my -16 and -1 level. You'll notice that once I re-engage these, that my integrated has gone up quite considerably and my true peak is now closer to 1. So I'm using limiting to basically bump up all of these channels to try and approach a more balanced integrated value. So that's the fourth stage, is using limiting to target the true peak and the LUFS. And I'm doing that, again, all that processing just on my stems. Okay. The final step is going to be master bus processing, and this is really unavoidable at this point, but you'll see that the actual processing I'm doing is really, really minimal, and you're going to hear that alt mixes sound pretty consistent with the full mixes. So the final thing that I do, I've got my Insight, which sometimes I also use to track this history. I don't want to get into that actually, because that'll be almost a whole nother discussion. But just to be clear, I've got 4 plugins on my master bus, but the first one, the visual mixer, has no impact on the actual master bus. Insight is just a metering plugin, Tonal Balance is just a metering plugin. So 3 of these 4 are just metering, or they have no influence. Then I've got Ozone, which certainly does have an influence, but you can see I'm actually only running a maximizer, and the maximizer itself is doing some pretty minimal compression. So what I'll do here is I will actually type in my target LUFS here, and then I learn the threshold as I play back, and Ozone figures it out. You'll see from this blue trace line here that even once it comes to a conclusion, it's not really doing that much in the way of compression. I want to make sure that I've got everything enabled here. And then from there, when I kick out the final result, I've kicked out the final audio file, you can see this is it in RX. You can see that I've got a very nice integrated loudness. I have the true peak target that I'm looking for, so -16 LUFS and 1 true peak. Still lots of nice dynamic range. You don't see a lot of clipping in the audio. It's very nice. I can even check this stereo here. You can see that's all coming through really nicely. And now when I come back to this, sorry, every time I use RX, it does change my sampling rate, which is frustrating. So I'm going to go back to 96 here. So now I want to play a little demo of how this helps me overcome the challenge of making sure that I can choose any combination of my stems to create alt mixes and still have them sound more or less the same. Okay. So let's say that I were to take out just, sorry, It's a quick link and see what's going on. So I take that out, I say that's an alt mix. It's still really comparable to the full mix in terms of level, no matter what I take out. Everything holds up in any combination, and that's the goal here. That's what I'm really trying to achieve, is mixing with very minimal processing on the master bus. And hopefully now you understand why I'm doing that and how I'm doing it, and that it's really a 5-step process. So just to summarize, step 1 is I set, well, really a pre-step, right? A pre-step is I use pre-gain to meet that target that I worked out in the spreadsheet. It was the log₁ equation. Then my first step is I run Visual Mixer. It does a rev mix for me. Second step is bass control. I start there, I solo the bass in tonal control, and I make sure that it's getting a good level, but it's also compressed and it has a good crest factor, meaning that there's not too much range between peaks and RMS, that I bring those a little closer, which is going to be basically compression. Step 3 is tonal balance, where I keep opening up EQs and soloing the different ranges to make sure I optimize my mix for around the tonal balance. The fourth step is limiters to target that LUFS and true peak. And the final step is that I run the LUFS learn threshold in Ozone. It really is at that point, it's cleaning up a dB, 2 dBs, that sort of thing. It's not a big change in the audio. And now I can come back to this project 3 months from now, spit out an alt mix, and be confident that it's going to sum to something very close to the original full mix, okay? If you have any questions about any of the stages that I've gone through here, please do post in the comments. I'm all ears. I do not profess to be a master of mixing or mastering, so if you're somebody out there who wants to pick me apart for flaws in my process, I'm totally open to constructive criticism about how I could improve, because I want to get as good as I can be. But I think this is a good model and I stand behind it. I think that it's based on good science and good tools. So I hope everybody's gotten a lot out of it and you can understand better what kind of workflow can help a media composer compose and produce and master to these broadcast standards while still maintaining the flexibility of creating alt mixes, okay? I am out of town, so right now this is playing as a prefab video, but I should be back next week, and I will be posting my next 3 topics on Monday morning. I'm so grateful for everybody's support. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again later on. Thanks. Bye.